And I'm actually expecting attendees to be here today, some numbers.
Okay.
Yeah. Populating. We could start with the admin items. I don't think anyone's going to be attending for those, so I think we're good to get going when you're ready.
Do we have a quorum?
We do.
Then I call the meeting to order.
Okay. First, there's no closed session for this meeting. So the first item on the agenda is the minutes.
Can I get a motion?
Move approval.
Any discussion? Is there a second? Jane seconded.
Second.
Any discussion?
All right, I will call the roll. I don't have a printed list, so I'm just going to do it in the order I see it on the screen. Commissioner Carrillo,
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson,
Aye.
Commissioner McAllister,
Aye.
Commissioner Kubas,
Aye.
Commissioner Ebner,
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
Aye.
Commissioner King.
Aye.
That is approved.
Next order of business.
That would be the report of the executive director. Got a lot to report. Well, one thing is I noticed that October is going to be the end of the term for 4 of you. Carrillo, King, McAllister, and Simpson. So if you're interested in serving for another term, I would suggest you start talking to the governor's appointments office. I don't know how long it takes for them to make that decision, so you've got several months, but you know, government moves slowly sometimes, so there's no harm in reaching out and letting them know about your interest if you have it. Another thing that I was going to mention is that I will be retiring in October. And the commission has decided in prior meetings, closed sessions, that they would like to do a, okay, Commissioner Carrion will be joining us soon, that they would like to do an open recruitment. So I have been waiting until after I make this announcement to start that. I'll be doing it in the next couple of weeks, posting something to our website and then advertising all the usual places. So hopefully that will start soon. I'm working with my administrative staff to figure out the exact timing of the start date, because there is a possibility, I'm told, of having the person start before I leave. So there would be a period of overlap, which we have the money to afford this year. And so it's just a matter of personnel procedure, whether that's permissible. I think it would be helpful. It would make the handoff smoother. As I've told you before, I had proposed a budget change proposal to the Department of Finance to make some staffing changes and to host the commission in the state library for administrative purposes. I was told a while back that that had been disapproved by the Department of Finance. And as is always the case, they asked me not to discuss that decision until after the governor's budget had been released, which was on January 10. So we're now in the clear. I don't have any formal explanation. I have some informal remarks, but I don't want to speak publicly about it because that's not really necessarily the position of the department or the governor. I decided not to push back on that decision at this time. In part because I'm just I think it would slow down the filling of our existing vacancies. It would put everything in continued limbo. And I would rather get things settled so that we can proceed with the hiring that we need to do so that we can be staffed up before I depart. Speaking of those hiring processes, the State Personnel Board just voted on January 12th to restructure the attorney classifications in state service. And the changes that they made eliminated a position that I was intending to use if I could get clearance from finance for that. So we have to rethink it, and we're in the process of that. I've reached out to finance. I have an alternative approach I want them to consider. And I'm hoping they will assent to it so that we can get moving on filling the vacancy created by Barbara's retirement. And you know, it's been a year since I started this process. And so I told them that I'm leaving in October and I would really like to get this done. Hopefully it won't take 2 years to do a simple recruitment. The last thing I have is I'm gonna mute briefly because I'm getting messages from Commissioner Carrion about her connectivity, and I'm gonna respond to her text. So just 1 second, please. Thank you. The last point for the executive director's report has to do with the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code. As you may realize, they are relatively autonomous. By design, the statute provides for non-overlapping membership between the committee and the commission, and neither body needs to approve the decisions of the other. So it was created to be largely independent of the commission. And the staffing practices have followed that. When they were created, we got authorization to hire some attorneys. We've hired them. While I am formally their supervisor, I don't really direct their work. The chair of the Committee on Revision of the Penal Code works closely with their staff. There's Commissioner Carrion. Works closely with their staff to direct their work. I'm in the loop, I'm observing it, but I'm not actively engaged. And then another aspect of it is, and this is COVID related, when most of the hiring was done was during COVID. And so we hired people with the expectation of remote work. And as a consequence of that, the attorneys we hired are not local to our headquarters office in Davis. So, you know, I've been talking to folks on the committee side and letting them know that I would be retiring in October. And they got a little anxious about whether my successor would have the same sort of operational approach that they value. The relative autonomy, the direction by their chair rather than by the executive director, and the option of remote work. They don't want a change in directorship to affect those practices that they think are valuable and they're relying on. And I told them that I saw it the same way that I didn't expect that a new director would disturb existing practices that are working well. But they're still anxious. And so I cannot bind the future director. I cannot bind the future commission, but I told them that I would raise the issue orally during my executive director's report and just share with you that it's my recommendation that those practices continue. you don't need to make a decision about it right now, but I do think that it has worked well. And I see no reason to change it, especially the remote work, because that has been, like I said, kind of baked in by the fact that we hired people from different parts of the state. Commissioner Correa?
Right, just a procedural question. Do you feel like those matters are things that the commission can weigh in on? I mean, we can have opinions, but that strikes me as those are administrative matters that we ordinarily wouldn't get involved in.
Yeah, I think it's mostly they're worried about my successor having
Right.
a philosophy. And formally, I am the director of the entire agency, including them. One statutory difference when they were created was that the governor appoints their chair. So rather than having a rotating one-year chair, as we do, they have someone picked by the governor who has been chair now for 2 years and probably will continue to be chair. And they don't have fixed terms. I mean, they have nominal terms, but they're exempt from the enforcement mechanism for ending their terms. So it makes sense to me that, that their chair has a different sort of operational relationship to their staff, to those staff, than you do. And so, like I said, I think it's the future director that they're worried about rather than the commission, but I just want to raise it with you so that if the future director were to have designs of that kind, and you'd hear about it. I mean, you would get contacted by the folks on the committee side. So I wanted to brief you on it and just share my own perspective for that future issue. If that issue comes up, my perspective is that I don't see any reason why we would want to upset their apple cart. So I'm just reporting that. Yes, Commissioner King.
Yeah, that all sounds fine, but I'm wondering if you need to spend some time with Richard and share with him what these practices are that the committee would like preserved, because it's kind of vague. So it'll be a he said after you leave. And maybe it'd be helpful for the chair of our committee to know what some of these practices and concerns that your other committee would like to have preserved.
Yeah, they're basically what I outlined. The chair of their committee working closely to direct their legal counsel's work, with me in more of an observer role than an active participant. Their remote work arrangement, which is critical to them. I think that's pretty much it. I think those are the things that they really
Okay.
don't.
I just want that to be memorialized in some way, maybe just by virtue of the fact we're discussing it here and it's being videotaped. We'll memorialize that, because it just sounds kind of vague and amorphous to me what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
that's fine.
and for the minutes on this item on our agenda, I can sort of memorialize in writing the 2 points I just noted, that it was my recommendation to the commission that those practices continue.
Okay, great. I'm just worried 2 years from now, no one will remember. All right, thanks.
David, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was going to make the suggestion about reflecting this discussion in the minutes. And then it also occurs to me that to the extent that this commission's members are involved in the hiring process for Brian's replacement, we can refer back to what's in the minutes and air that out.
That's all I have for the executive director's report. We have a couple of other administrative memos on the agenda that Steve has drafted and will present.
Any commissioner thoughts or comments on what we've done so far before we move on? Going once, going twice. Okay, Steve, next order.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So the first item is memorandum 2023-2. This is our annual memo summarizing upwind government statutes that generally relate to the commission work. And the memo also updates you on any new developments over the past year that might be related to those statutes. The memo requires no decisions by the commission. And this year, except for one reenacted code section continuing the suspension of some procedural requirements relating to teleconference public meetings. The staff found no significant developments, either amendments to those statutes or other judicial decisions that might relate. So any questions or comments about the memo, which is otherwise just informational?
Seeing none.
Wait, there's one hand, I think.
Oh, okay.
Commissioner Carrier.
Hi, good morning. All I wanted to say is thank you to staff and to our executive director for all their great work. I think that this annual report is really instrumental in highlighting all the tasks that get done and how much work the commission really does. So I just wanted to thank you all for your hard work last year. It's been a challenging time with COVID. I'm sure it's been a challenging time for everyone for many different reasons. So I appreciate your work and wanted to recognize that.
Thank you. Steve, anything further from you or further comments from the commissioners on Steve's segment? Going once, going twice. Did we skip over commissioner suggestions?
Yeah, perhaps we did.
Okay. Steve, thank you. Let's revert back to commissioner discussions. Commissioner suggestions. Any discussion? Proposals, thoughts, general matters? I see shaking of heads, going once, going twice. Okay. Brian, next in order.
Well, Steve, you didn't present the annual report draft yet, did you?
That's correct.
Okay, let's do that.
All right, thank you. So now we're on 2023-3, which is presenting the staff draft of the commission's annual report this year for 2022-23. Also, you got a draft of one of the multiple appendices that we attach when the report is fully put together, which is an appendix containing bios for each of you. Somewhat like the open government memo, the bulk of the text of the annual report repeats from year to year, doesn't change very much, but the beginning and the concluding portions summarizing commission's work over the past year, status of legislation affecting our recommendations, personnel, activities, and what we plan to do for the coming year. Those do change from year to year, as well as any Supreme Court decisions that we're required to report. And unlike the other memo, as this is a report that has to be filed by statute with the legislature, we'll need a formal vote to approve it. But first, a few questions. First, does anyone have any questions or comments, suggestions, objections to any content of the report? Commissioner Carrillo.
Very minor and trivial on page 25. Could I get my middle initial?
Sure.
There's literally like 500 guys named David Carrillo in the United States. I got to stand out.
No problem. I'll check through. I assume you'd want that
Anywhere it appears, yeah.
anywhere it appears.
Thank you.
And just to double check, can you tell me what the middle initial is?
A.
What I thought. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner King.
Yeah, it's not a question about the report, but the document in which the report goes in. I noticed for the first time we got a paperback version of the commission's work and as well as a hardback edition. Since I've been in the commission for close to 12 years now, what's the paperback version and how does that relate? Because we haven't received the paperback before. So I was just curious as to what we were getting in terms of these annual things.
I think that's a question for Brian.
Well, let me ask you, I'm not sure what you got. Is it a paperback compilation that is identical to the content of the hardcover?
Well, I haven't gone through it in any great detail. I was just surprised to get two things this year, whereas normally at the most we get one hardcover every 2 years in general.
I
Yeah.
also got the paperback.
And the hardcover?
I don't know if I got a hardcover too.
Yeah, I don't, I don't know the answer to that. I suspect it was just a processing glitch. We produced the paperbacks mostly for the purposes of satisfying the Library Distribution Act, which requires that government reports be distributed to state repository libraries. And so we give them the paperback version rather than the hardback version. I don't know why one would have been sent to, I'm seeing Commissioner Simpson has
Yep,
one.
and both.
Okay,
I think it was just a glitch.
okay, that's fine. And I'm not upset about it. I was just curious as to if we were changing our processes or if there's something different going on, because I've never gotten a paperback before, but I guess it's fine to have both. Okay,
I don't want to
Just to be clear, those are, you're talking about the bound volume, right? Which is not only the annual report, but everything that was done in the year that's covered by the book that you
Right.
got.
right. And I did get that this year. Maybe David didn't. You may want to check on that.
Well, I haven't been in my office in 2 months, so it might be there.
Okay, thank you. That's fine.
So
Sure, we will.
after, I'll have an issue I'd like to raise about those publications, but I'll hold off until Steve completes his item and you vote on the AR, the annual report.
All right. So any other comments, questions, objections to the content of the annual report? Seeing none, how about any corrections anyone else has to their bio? I got one from Commissioner Simpson, which I've already implemented. And now we have the initial from Commissioner Carrillo. Everyone else okay? And the last question is, there is a section in the report on page 29 where we summarize any work that any commissioner has done outside, or any activities any commissioner has done outside of what we do here that would be related to commission work. We have an example of something that Barbara Gall did as a staff member. And occasionally, not often, there is something that a commissioner wants to offer. Did anyone have any such contribution? Okay.
There's one other point that Steve and I discussed, which is that it doesn't come up much in the body of the report, but it is in the biographical appendix. The question of whether we want to go as a standard practice to using gender neutral pronouns like their, them, rather than saying he, his. We could do that on a blanket approach, or we could let commissioners individually express their preferences. We just didn't want to presume an approach. So how would people feel about us just generally using them there? I believe that's the new legislative drafting style. Yeah.
Mhm.
Commissioner Jenkins confirmed that. Is that okay?
I'm okay with mine the way it is,
So leave it as it is?
please.
All right, so it sounds like the practice will be that we're, as a matter of staff style, we will use the gender neutral pronouns with the exception that Commissioner Carrillo has asked to keep his masculine pronouns, I presume. And
Same
our
for
general
me,
practice,
or use she, please.
use she. Okay, so the
Or-
asterisk on our practice would be that individual choice overrules the general. So happy to accommodate Commissioners Carrillo and Cubas.
Are we talking about just the bios here, or are we talking about in general? When
Well,
we're,
I think that it's most present in the bios. I don't know if the body of the annual report has any, but I would think it's a general drafting practice.
that's okay with the commission? All right. All right. I have not looked through, but that's, nobody wants any changes then in the report, this report relating to those pronouns, correct?
Well, we're going to look at the appendix and implement the approach that was just discussed. Other than that, we need a vote on the approving the annual.
No, I understand. I understand. Okay. I meant the body of the report is separate from the appendices. All right. Yeah, so I do need a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion. Call the roll.
All right, Commissioner Carrillo,
Aye.
Commissioner Carrion,
Aye.
Commissioner Hebner,
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
Aye.
Commissioner King,
Aye.
Commissioner McAllister,
Aye.
and Commissioner Simpson.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you very
You
much.
forgot me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which name did I? Oh, wait. I was-
Kuwas.
To us.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Kuas. I'm so sorry. I went right past. you.
Aye.
So sorry.
I know there's a lot of Cs now, but.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. All right, thank you. I think that's all I have for this memo.
And I believe this is former Senator Leyva who has joined us.
Good morning. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
Thank you for making the time for us. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
I am going to just run through the legislative program memo super fast because we've got a time certain set for 10. And I'd like to be a little closer to that in case audience members are relying on it. So the legislative program memo is 2304, and it's mostly a discussion of my efforts to find vehicles to implement our recommendations for this year, and we've been pretty successful. The Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife is working with Steve to introduce a committee bill for the fish and game proposals. Our Assembly member Ash Kalra, has agreed to introduce a bill on our recommendation relating to administrative subpoenas served on communication service providers. I am talking to staff at the Assembly Committee on Judiciary about introducing a committee bill to implement we have a couple of recommendations relating to trial court restructuring. I don't yet have an answer for a certain answer on that, but it's expected that I'm expecting that it will work out. And then I just heard yesterday that Assemblymember Manchin, who's the new chair of the Assembly Judiciary, has agreed to carry our proposal on stock cooperatives and revocable transfer on death deeds. So we have homes for all of our proposals if Assembly Judiciary is able to carry our trial court restructuring proposals. So that's all good news. One point I wanted to mention is that there were some changes made to the language of one of our proposals in the process of getting a bill draft prepared. Mostly, this is the administrative subpoena proposal. They were mostly technical, just changes to conform more closely to the Legislative Council's style, and I won't run through those. That report's not yet been put in final form, so I will probably go through as just a technical staff process and conform the language to the style that was chosen in preparing the draft. The only more substantive point is that part of that proposal included it turns on giving notice to a customer when an administrative agency serves a subpoena on the communication service provider. So the customer knows that their service provider is about to provide their information to this administrative agency. And it spells out a procedure for that. And one piece of that procedure is a proof of service. So the agency has to give the service provider proof of service on the customer. And the language in the proposal said that the proof of service attests to compliance with the procedural requirements. The deputy at Legislative Council was concerned that a reference to attestation would be construed as implicating a penalty of perjury if you lie in your attestation, and that would constitute a new crime, which would impose a unfunded local mandate, which would create special procedural hurdles for the bill. And it wasn't my recollection that we ever talked about that specific issue or that the commission had any invested position on whether that should be an attestation subject to penalty of perjury. So what I worked out with the drafter was to change it to a simple statement stating compliance with blah, 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 rather than an attestation. And That's a little bit more substantive because of the implications, but I thought that it was not a significant deviation from anything that we had committed to in the report. So if the commission is comfortable with that, I will again amend the recommendation, which is not yet in print, to conform to it. If the commission is not comfortable with that, then we can reverse it. We can amend the bill to put the language back and just live with the consequences. So I'm running this by you, not looking for a formal decision, but just to see if anybody has any concerns about those changes that I made.
Any
No?
discussion, thoughts, comments?
Okay, then the bill will be introduced in that form. And like I said, I will make conforming revisions to our recommendation. And it's still 10 o'clock. So I'm going to hand it over to Kristen.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, commissioners. To start off this item, of course, we have Senator Connie Leyva here. We thank her very much for joining us. She served in the state Senate from 2014 to 2022. And one of the things that she did in 2022 was to author Senate Concurrent Resolution 92, which assigned the commission this work on the Equal Rights Amendment and California law. So as we get started on this work, we invited her to join us to provide some introductory remarks to the commission. So without further ado, just want to turn it over to her and allow her to speak with the commission and the commissioners to speak with her.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you all for having me. I'm in a new role now. I'm in my office at KVCR Public Radio and Television. I'm the executive director for PBS and NPR out here in the Inland Empire. But thank you for asking me, because I loved my job for 8 years. And I was lucky enough to do a lot of really good work. So I think that Betsy Butler is on and attending. And I have to do a little shout out to Betsy for 2 reasons. One, she brought me this idea about making sure that California would be ready in the events that finally the ERA gets passed. And then she also brought me the idea for my very, very favorite bill of the 53 bills that we had signed into law when I was in the Senate. And that was SB 813, the Justice for Victims Act, and it eliminated the statute of limitations on rape. So Betsy, thank you. I appreciate you. But back to why you asked me to be here. So we were approached and asked if we would make sure that California was ready in the event the ERA passes, which I guess I just have to say, as probably all of you feel, it's just shocking that it hasn't and that we're still waiting all of these years. But the good news is that when the commission takes a look at this and they promulgate whatever rules are necessary or any changes that have to be made, we will be ready in California so that it would theoretically be a smooth transition. I have to tell you a little inside baseball. It is always amazing to me the things that people vote against or don't want to support. And there were women on the floor of the Senate who did not support this resolution. I mean, that is just shocking to me. I think that if you can't support this, anybody who doesn't support this, they should get their woman card certainly revoked. But we did get it passed, and California will now actively prepare and make sure that we are ready for implementation and proactively identify any laws that might violate the amendment so that we can make those, we can take remedial action prior to, so that we're ready to go. So there's not a lot. It's a pretty straightforward resolution, but I'd love to hear from any of you. I'd also say that you have a great author in Ash Kalra. He will do a great job for you. He works his bills very hard and he is well respected. So good choice of an author.
So do any commissioners have any questions?
Simpson.
Sure. Sure. Nice to see you, Connie Leyva, outside of the Capitol.
Yes, I'm very happy.
No, my question was more just sort of procedural. I was sort of looking online the other day about the status of the ERA federally, and there have been the 3/4 of the states who have ratified it. A couple have allegedly withdrawn their ratification. I'm not sure that's valid, but then there was this deadline issue. I wasn't quite sure what the status of the ERA nationally was.
And you know what? I probably should have looked that up. I don't know either nationally. Okay, there we go. We've got our expert right here, David.
My center looked at this a while back, and to my knowledge, the answer hasn't changed, which is it's up to Congress. Congress just has to enact a concurrent resolution and then send it to the relevant administrative authority. So it just has to be officially, sort of signed, sealed, and delivered. So we basically concluded it's in Congress's hands. If they want to do it, they can do it. If they don't want to do it, it'll stay where it is.
Huh. Okay, thank you.
I have a feeling that they're going to be too focused on investigating Hunter Biden and things like that than to do something that will actually help the American people. But I hope I'm wrong.
And the debt limit, yeah.
And the debt limit, oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother topic.
One benefit of this study substantively is that even if the ERA is not formally enacted at the federal level, California law will achieve the same result.
Mm-hmm.
Victor had his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Victor.
I have a question, and I don't have any dog in this fight of what I'm suggesting. I just want to raise the issue, and I know there may be implications that I haven't even thought of, but the memo concludes by saying our next step will be looking at the scope of the language, quote, on account of sex, unquote. Does that, and I'm not advocating for it, I'm just asking the question, should it be on account of sex or gender?
So the memo.
And I recognize you borrowed that phrase from the ERA language itself, because 40 years ago, that's the only phrase they used when discussing these subjects. They never for a second thought about using the phrase gender. Again, I'm not advocating for that. I'm not even aware of all of the implications of what I'm suggesting and how that might affect the study. I just think if the study's going to start, we should agree on the terms.
So I'll just want to acknowledge the memo was my writing, and it does just track the language of the ERA, which is quoted in the memo. In terms of what the scope of that is, I'd welcome Senator Leyva to speak to that as well. But that's something that we'll be addressing as a next step in this work. So.
Well, and I would say, Victor, you make a really good point, because back when it was drafted, you're right, no one thought to include gender, but I think that would be a very good idea to include that sex/gender, sex or gender. I will leave it to the attorneys to wordsmith it properly, but I think that's actually a very good idea.
So maybe that'll need to be an early vote at a future meeting as to just the actual terminology before we start getting into the meat.
Yeah, good call.
Other thoughts from the commissioners? Going once, going twice? Kristen?
All right. Well, I also want to note that it looks like we are joined by Kathy Spiller, who is with let me get this correct, the Feminist Majority Foundation, the executive director, and her organization was one of the sponsors of Senate Concurrent Resolution 92. I see that she has her hand up and that she might want to address the commission as well. I know she's following the ERA closely as well. So it looks like she has been authorized to speak, and she is currently muted.
Yeah, Ms. Spiller, you actually appear twice in the attendees list. So you might be signed in from multiple devices. One of which is muted. Now you're both unmuted. Okay, good.
So can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead and unraise your hand.
I apologize. I registered twice.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
I wanted to address a couple of the questions that have come up, but first I wanted to say thank you, Senator Leyva. Just really, this is so exciting, and my co-sponsor, Betsy Butler, who's on, so we're very excited to help in any way that we can. You're exactly right, Chair Carrillo, that we're waiting on Congress. The House has acted twice to clear up this issue of both the timeline and rescissions. You can't rescind, a state cannot rescind once it's ratified an amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment has met all requirements under the US Constitution, but the Trump administration interfered with the archivist doing the ministerial step of publishing the Equal Rights Amendment. And we have been fighting ever since to overcome that. And I can assure you, we will overcome it someday. So the work that this commission is going to be doing and that Kristen is leading is going to be very relevant. And as Brian said, we want to conform California law anyway to not be discriminatory. And then to address Commissioner King's question, I would just point out that the term on account of sex also covers LGBTQIA. I mean, it's been interpreted that way by federal courts because, for example, Title VII has been written as non-discrimination in employment on account of sex. And in fact, there have been federal court decisions that said, yes, that applies to people who are LGBTQIA. So I think it gives us a chance here in California to be very broad and address all of the issues that, I think people are and that you're thinking about without having to also just take a look at gender, because I think it's incorporated, which is the good news. That's the good news. So very excited, and anything we can do to be helpful, we want to be helpful.
And if I can just say thank you, Kathy, we appreciate you and Feminist Majority helping us get it across the finish line. And I also want to reiterate something that Kathy said about people when we were trying to get the bill out of both houses. People were like, why are we doing it now? Why don't we just wait until the ERA passes? And I always think it's funny how people don't want to be proactive. But I think people like to find a reason to say no rather than finding a reason to say yes. But Kathy, thank you for all your help. We appreciated you on Team Leyva.
Thank you.
So I also just want to note that Betsy Butler of the California Women's Law Center is also here, and her organization is also a co-sponsor. Sorry, Betsy, I didn't see your name, so I wasn't sure.
It's okay, I'm Kathy Spiller today. There's not enough of her to go around, let me tell you. So I'm happy. No, I couldn't find the link, so she very kindly sent it to me. So that's why we're appearing this way. So sorry for any confusion on that, but just want to say really quickly, underscore what Connie said, and thank you, Kristen and Brian, for spearheading this, and for the commission, and then for, of course, Connie for carrying it, because it means a lot. This is the first state to do this, and you're up to the minute person on what's happening nationally with the ERA is Kathy Spiller. She is tied into every moment of it. So whenever you have a question, she will know that. And I just want to let you know that we stand ready. I run the California Women's Law Center, and we have a board of 24 lawyers, plus I know a heck of a lot of other lawyers and non-lawyers who all are thrilled this is happening and want to help. So as we go along, just let us know what we can do or how we can help. And we stand ready to do so. And it's lovely to see Connie. I miss you already. So thank you, and thank you to Kathy, of course. And thank you, Kathy, for letting me be you this morning. I appreciate that.
And Betsy, thank you. I miss you. There's some people I definitely miss from Sacramento, some people I don't miss. But what I am excited about is that the work is continuing.
Yeah.
That when Kristen reached out to me, I'm like, oh, this is just great. It makes me feel good about a lot of the work that I was able to do with my great team. And thank you. Thank you all for continuing on and keeping up the fight. I might not be in Sacramento, but I am continuing the fight in a different arena here in public television and broadcasting. So I will continue to do my part, and anything you need from me, you can always call on me.
You had a very impactful tenure, Connie, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Betsy.
See, Commissioner Carrion has her hand up.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank Honorable Leah, as well as all of the different leaders here for their work. It's incredible to be part of this. It is something that is so needed. I'm a queer Latina, and I fit many different pegs of identity, and it's so essential. I think that when I read our memo, I see how grand this project is. but what the grandness of it really identifies to me the need, right? Of how much this particular work is going to touch so many people in California, because we are all connected to this in one way or another. So I'm thrilled to be part of this process. And I want to thank all of you for doing the head, leading and really getting us to this moment. We have so much more to go than this. So much more, but this is a concrete and very comprehensive way of moving the ball forward for our generation and hopefully for a lot of other generations coming before us. So I thank my ancestors and I thank the present people doing the work. So thank you so much.
And David Hebner has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. I would like to echo Commissioner Carrion's thanks and comments. At an earlier meeting, the issue was raised about whether sex would include LGBTQ+, given the Supreme Court's decision. There was some discussion of it, and I'm delighted that all three members of the public who spoke stated the position that, yes, of course, it's included. Too often, civil rights is segmented as a tactic for slowing civil rights. And I'm delighted to see we don't play those games here in California. So thank you very much for your clear statement on that point.
And in response to all of the commissioner comments, I just want to emphasize what Kristen said, which is the scope of what is meant by sex discrimination is the main topic for discussion at the February meeting on this study. So Kristen's going to be pulling together all of the legal research that supports an answer on that question so that we have a clear legal basis and foundation for it. And she's also hoping to bring in some scholars to address the commission on the point.
Kristen, if I might, I had one other question, which is, I view this particular project as a priority, and I'm curious about your current view of scope of work and timeline.
So late last year, when the commission first started considering this study, one of the first orders of business was to codify a provision that achieves the effect of the ERA in California. That is the piece that we're really moving forward with. I will say the legal context and trying to get a sense of all the law that's out there is significant. I think originally I had hoped that I would be able to get more substantive in this memo, but there is just a lot of material that requires looking at, getting familiar with, kind of understanding how everything is situated together. As the memo indicates, we're expecting to sort of address the question of the scope of sex in the next memorandum. And then ideally in March, we'll be able to deal with the questions around equal protection. Then we have to start thinking about where might California's law not meet what we find the ERA's effect to be. And that's the piece that it's a little bit uncertain about timelines. I do think, we'll be moving through these big questions about scope in the next couple of months. Ideally, we'll be able to sort of come to a resolution around how to implement what we're calling a sex equality provision in the memorandum in California law late this year.
Yeah, and this is similar to the sort of staffing structure that I'm assembling for the antitrust study, in that there's going to be multiple tracks, and one of the tracks is external experts. So Kristen's doing this heavy lift at the outset to help develop this basic bulwark of an anti-discrimination provision, but she's also going to be working with outside experts who will be preparing background information for the commission about problems in other areas of the law. So the second phase will be taking the work that those experts provide and then looking at making necessary conforming changes to other laws to be consistent with the basic sex equality provision. So I would expect this year we'll finish work on the basic provision, and then next year we'll be working on the disparate issues in other law.
I don't see any other hands. Kristen?
So just getting to the memo, memo 23-5, which is before the commission today. As I mentioned, it mostly discusses this idea of codifying what we're calling a sex equality provision to achieve the effects of the ERA in California. We're not prejudging the question of whether or not that can be a single provision versus multiple provisions. That's still something that we'll need to look at going forward. But in terms of what the commission will be looking at over the next few months, the first question is what the ERA's language on the basis of sex should be understood to mean. That analysis, as the memo indicates, is going to focus largely on the history of employment discrimination law. And so there is a large body of law there that kind of shows how the understanding of what constitutes sex discrimination under that law has developed. And so that legal analysis will be presented in the memo, and we are hoping to have an expert to discuss with the commission the current understanding of what the scope of sex is in that context. And then sort of the other half of the sex equality provision is thinking about equality and what does equality mean, and looking at equal protection law and how the ERA will change the current state of law for equal protection. Those are kind of the next big steps. I mean, both of those bodies of law, the employment discrimination law and equal protection, are significant. So we're, as staff, trying to come up to speed, but also looking to experts to really build out that understanding for the commission. So those will be the next steps, as thinking about how the commission should understand the scope of the ERA. Of course, the ERA, given its status, is not something where the courts have analyzed its language in detail or worked out its scope. So that's something that we're going to need to look at, and using these related bodies of law to understand. So one of the things I just want to note in the memo is, the footnotes identify a number of sources that we'll be discussing in more detail in future memoranda. But if there's any particular items that the commission wants staff to include or discuss, please let me know. You're welcome to do that now or follow up later. I see Commissioner Carrion has a hand up.
Yes, as even though I've now transitioned from prosecutor, victim advocate in criminal law, in my past attorney life, I was an affordable housing attorney and community economic development attorney. So I bring that to the table. And of course, that means I would love to see the Fair Housing Act including in that.
Okay.
In addition, as an advocate for previous, and currently for youth, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex in public education, public schools. Mm-hmm. Also, I wanted to bring up, and I'm not sure if this is the right place for it, but the Federal Code of Regulations, which I'm not, implements so much of the work, the constitutional work. I don't know if we want to highlight that here. I know that we have statutes that we're highlighting rather than regulations, but I do see that we want to make sure that anything that kind of supports or in any way works on the fundamental statutes that we're looking at is also up to par.
Okay. All right, I've made a note of that, so I appreciate those suggestions, and we'll get those incorporated as well. Are there any other comments, questions?
Christian, you don't need, oh, Victor.
Yeah, I raised the issue of gender before, just so that we say that we've looked at or thought about these issues. The other categories, as I understand them, that we might want to consider expanding our definitions on is sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So I know that's incredibly long-winded, but just I want to be sure that we at least thought about the issue. Our present mission is to look at, quote, account of sex, unquote. And I certainly understand that comes from the ERA language from 40, 50 years ago. But just so we get off on the right foot, do we want to explicitly state our mission is also on account of sex or gender or sexual orientation or gender expression or gender identity? I'm not advocating for all of that. I know it's unwieldy, but I just want to make sure that we were on record as saying that we were sensitive to the possibilities.
Kathy has her hand up.
Betsy, sorry, Betsy. I was wondering, sorry, I was wondering if Kristen or Brian could talk about the lawyers you've already talked to, because, for example, Brad Sears, who runs the Williams Institute at UCLA Law School, the Williams Institute, for those of you who don't know, is all about, it's a think tank, a legal think tank for LGBTQ people. Also, Erwin Chemerinsky has been involved, and I honestly don't know who else you all have talked to, and that's just the beginning. Just want to also put a plug in that my organization, the Women's Law Center, we are the Title IX advocates for California, so we're all over that, and we also do a lot of affordable housing work. So come to us for that too, because I loved hearing what you said, Commissioner Karen. So anyway, I just was curious if maybe you could update us on what the lawyers have been doing and who you've been talking to, because I honestly don't know, and whether that's relevant or not.
So yeah, we are reaching out. I think Dean Sears at the Williams Institute would be a great resource. I'm hoping that maybe we can get him or a colleague in for an upcoming meeting, trying to figure out availability and scheduling. We have reached out to Dean Chemerinsky about attending in March, and I believe that should work. We're kind of trying to finalize scheduling on that because, of course, he really can speak to some of these big constitutional questions about equal protection and the ERA's effect on that law. Those are the ones that I sort of want to announce publicly at this point. But, we are working on identifying other experts going forward to sort of implement the specific items like that Brian had mentioned. We're going to be looking into specific areas of law and trying to find experts that really focus on those topics. So
recommendations are welcomed.
Yeah.
Sochi, you had your hand up. Did you change your mind?
Well, I'll just mention, I think that I will advocate for the inclusion of all of those things in there. I will, firmly advocate for that. I also recognize that we have experts that are, the brain trust that we have access to is amazing. I do sometimes get concerned with comprehensive lists for an idea that then it can be excluded. Another issue, as these issues have been evolving, we have seen, especially in gender expression and LGBTQ plus movements, that the languages is constantly evolving. So I think that it is our, something that's important for us to create language that is obviously not vague, but that would kind of identify the spirit, right, of the language of what the intent is. So I think that will be an interesting exercise, and I'm looking forward to hearing and learning more from the experts. But I do think it's important. I wanted to just put on the record that firmly advocating that the more inclusion of this bill, the stronger, more powerful it will be in the lives of people daily.
Just a scheduling point. We have a presentation scheduled at 11, and the agenda was structured to optimistically try and address the fish and game issues after completion of this item and before commencement of that presentation at 11. So not that I want to quash a good conversation that we've been having, but my eyes are on the clock a little bit.
Kristen, do you feel that we can move on?
Yeah, so I guess the only other thing that I'll note is there's a lot of movement in this area of law generally. So the staff is not planning on monitoring all of the California legislation that's happening in this area in great detail. But if there's anything we should watch, we are going to sort of lightly monitor how things are changing and developing to be aware of that. But we welcome suggestions on any specific legislation that we should be tracking or providing updates on. So again, feel free to send those to me or identify them now. Commissioner Carrion.
Yes, and as you can tell, I'm very excited to work on this. In addition to mentioning the federal codes, obviously we would address the California Code of Regulations as well. One of the things that I've done is looking at the pending legislation, and that's the beauty of working with advocates that have been doing this work for an incredibly long time, you know, federally looking at, and locally in California, looking at the Human Rights Campaign, ACLU, you know, and also Equality California. All of those have been and are currently listing and keeping track of legislation. So they may be an essential partner in facilitating, letting us know what is the movement of what's pending and all of that work. So I would recommend that we start tapping those institutions, those agencies now, because the more we get them involved as early as possible, I think that they will help us throughout this process.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Human Rights Campaign, ACLU, Equality California.
Well, I think we should thank the senator and her colleagues for their very thoughtful and inspirational comments, and your assistance is greatly appreciated. I'm sure that Kristen will be reaching out to you and all of the various allies and stakeholders here as this issue moves forward. It's obviously a very important issue, and I look forward to working on it with everyone.
Thank you for having me, and keep up the great work. Everything that you're doing is making people's lives better every day. I'm going to be trying to do that now through public media. So thank you all very much, and anything I can help with, happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator and Betsy.
Thank
and
you. Thank
Kathy.
you so much.
You.
Thanks, everyone.